through it, then we could have some questions and answers if anybody has any of those after maybe 45, 50 minutes. And before we begin to do that, can I just ask you, please, just to unmute your microphone and just let me know if you can hear me okay?
That's a positive, we can hear you.
Good, somebody can hear me. Oh, that's good. Okay. I'm kind of hoping that everybody else can hear me as well. Okay, we'll get started then. Now, I have a couple of, in case you don't know who I am and how I come to be doing this and so on. We have a couple of slides to explain that. So here's who I am, Director of Transformations Institute, which I have been for something like 15 years or so. And we're now working in association with Illuminations. So just to let you know who we are really. And here you'll see some of the logos of some of the organizations that accredit our courses. And we've been running courses in this region now for a decade and a half. Here we are being presented with the School of the Year Award by the Chairman of the Association for Professional Hypnosis and Psychotherapy in London. We've won this award twice and we're quite proud of that. So I'd just like to tell people that right at the beginning. Now, you may have heard this saying, when the winds of change blow strong, some people build walls while others build windmills. Well, this is always true, and it's especially true at the moment. We're living now in a time where we have some very strong winds of change blowing and some very strange winds of change, the like of which I think probably most people have never come across before. Now, this is about economic challenges and how to deal with economic challenges as we go through this, because if you're keeping an eye on the news, you'll have noticed that the world economy is being trashed at the moment. Whoa, somebody's got their mic on. Let's see if I can get rid of that. Yeah, that's an improvement. Okay, that was a surprise. Or should I say a shock? Okay, so you've probably noticed, you know, there are millions of people out of work now, entire countries, economies are going down the drain and so on. And just about everybody, I think almost everybody below a certain level of phenomenal wealth, just about everybody else is being affected in some way. Now, when people are affected economically, they're usually affected psychologically and emotionally as well. We may not be able to directly influence the economics, especially on a big scale, but one thing we can always take control of is our own state of mind. And that's what this is about. Now, the more we're in control of our own state of mind, the more we're going to be able to deal with the situation that we find ourselves in economically. Now, this is what's called the Satir model of change. Now, Virginia Satir, you may have heard of Virginia. If you haven't, I recommend you find out more. She was a remarkable person. She more or less invented family therapy. It didn't really exist before Virginia's work. And she's also one of the three major psychotherapists that Richard Bandler based his understanding, his development of neuro-linguistic programming on. Now, you may have seen this before. This has been, and I hope you have, this has been hijacked, the same as Maslow's pyramid has, by the business community at large. And in relation to helping people deal with change, you know, when they have to restructure and so on in big corporations. Now, here's the way this diagram works. There's the arrow there on the left side of your screen, facing upwards. This is people's performance, how well they perform, how effective they are at what they do. And across here, the horizontal arrow indicates the timeline. Now, this is what tends to happen. You have a status quo. Now, think of this. This is a structure. This is a structure for helping us to deal with change, any kind of change, whether it's in business, whether it's in your own mental processes, whether it's in relationships, because change has a structure. So one of the things that we're big on here is looking at structures, understanding structures, and then applying them so that we can make ourselves more effective, more empowered to deal with more difficult situations if and when they arise. Now, here's what happens. So people generally go along in life. Over here, you have the status quo. You know how things are, you know how things work, you go to work every day, you see people at certain times, you eat certain food. This is normal life. And then suddenly something disrupts that. Now, Virginia calls this a foreign element, which doesn't mean they come from a country that This means just something from outside, some disruptive element, some bad experience. And at the moment, there's this whole COVID nonsense going on across the planet. That's the foreign element here. Now, whether we like it or not, these happen. They happen from time to time. They happen on a personal level, or they happen on a global level, or they happen in your society or whatever. But they happen. And we're going to have to deal with all just in your business or your work, but they happen. Once they've happened, you have no choice but to deal with it, because usually they don't go away. If they do go away, you don't need this diagram. The situation that we're in at the moment hasn't shown a lot of signs of going away for a while yet. So here's what tends to happen. The first stage that people go through is resistance. We don't like being disrupted. We don't like things being messed up. And so we do desperately try to hang on to the old way of understanding, thinking, working, and so on. Now, as we hang on to that, it doesn't apply anymore because things aren't like that anymore. And so we go into a state of chaos. And that's where we really start to lose our grip. Now, again, you can think of this in different levels, in different situations, and that's where we fall. However, there's something that can happen there, and Virginia calls this a transforming idea. If at this point we can actually have a new understanding, a different understanding, if we can look at things in a new way, then we can start to create a new way of dealing with things, whatever those things may be. And from then on, we start to climb out of the pit and we establish a new status quo. So we get things back to normal again and it all goes along fine until the next thing that comes along and disrupts it. And so there's always going to be some disruption to some degree in any area of life. We happen to be living through a big global disruption, but then, you know, big global disruptions have happened before and they will probably happen again and we will have to deal with them. So that's the model, that's how it works. Now, what Virginia calls the transforming idea in neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, which is something that I'm steeped in and which I've been teaching for many years and coaching people in, we talk a lot about reframing. Reframing is the key. So reframing is being able to look at something in a new way, in a different way. Now, Einstein is supposed to have said, you know, you get all these things that Einstein's supposed to have said, Buddha's supposed to have said, and so on. But Einstein, I don't know if they really did, but Einstein's supposed to have said, you can't solve a problem from the same frame of mind in which the problem was created. And I think whoever said it, it's a very good point. We need to get into a different frame of mind in order to understand things differently. And there are many people who've come to similar conclusions. Neuroscience is very useful in this respect nowadays, alongside psychology and sociology. And everybody's coming up with the same understanding. Something has to change within people in order to be able to change things outside. Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about how people can't think outside of their own emotions. So whatever your dominant emotions are, your thoughts will tend to run in a little loop. In cognitive behavioral therapy, they talk about the same thing. People in business talk about thinking inside the box or getting out of the box, thinking outside the box. That's what we're talking about here, a transforming idea, a reframe. And Virginia said, life is not what it's supposed to be. That's certainly true, isn't it? It's not what it's supposed to be, it's what it is. It's the way you cope with it that makes the difference. And I have a lovely saying in martial arts that it's not the punch, it's what you do after the punch comes. Because if you're still standing there when it arrives, you're in trouble. If you've moved, then maybe you're not. Now, here's a little example of somebody who did a reframe. And there are so many, we collect these stories, there are so many wonderful stories going back to the origins of history, right down to every single day. And you can find them all around you amongst ordinary people, as well as amongst the intellectual giants and the psychological giants and the business giants. People who are able to just look at something and do something differently. This is one of my more recent favorites. Now, every summer, you may know this if you live in temperate climates anytime, there's a plant called burdock and it has these prickly things, these prickly balls that come off the plants. Now, this is the way of the plant. The plant has its own intention in doing this because those prickly balls carry the seeds. So they can guarantee that burdocks get spread everywhere because they catch onto things. They catch onto dog's fur, they catch onto sheep's wool, they catch onto human clothing. So they'll catch onto just about anything. And then that animal or that person will carry the seed somewhere else, and then the seed will grow in that new location, which is, you know, what every species wants, is to be able to keep reproducing and to do it in safer and better environments. So back in 1941, George was taking a walk through the Alps, and once again his dog was covered in burrs. If you've had a dog and you've walked in these places, you will know what this is like. I've spent time picking burrs off. I know what this is like. And so he wondered. He was an engineer, and engineers are always interesting to look at engineers thinking. If you can get an engineer to think outside the box, if you can get an engineer, any kind of engineer, to apply their thinking skills in a different area, you will come up with something new and more useful than what we had before. And I've seen this on a personal level, as well as in less personal situations. I love teaching engineers because once the engineer steps out of their box and applies the engineering somewhere else, they understand things that many people without that training don't understand. My view is that thinking is not taught in any education system on this planet, not one. There are only two subjects that teach thinking. One is philosophy and the other is engineering. And engineering in many ways is superior because, you know, when you design a bridge, it has to stand up. You can't wait for 300 or 400 years for somebody to disprove your theory. It either works or people die. This is one of the reasons I like engineers. If you come up with educational theories, there's a whole generation before you find out if it works or not. Politics, economics, it's all the same. It's all theory, theory, theory. Much of which is never verified. But when we come down to engineering, these guys know how to make things work. So he had a look at one of these things under his microscope. And this is what happened. He invented Velcro because he found that fur and wool and certain kinds of fabrics all had a similar kind of a shape, a similar kind of a texture. And he found that the burr's little hooks would always latch onto these. And he ended up inventing Velcro, which is used everywhere, including on the moon. And here's an illustration of somebody using Velcro on the moon. Now, I like this as a metaphor. If you can take the same principle in order to come up with a transforming idea, and everybody can do this, and you probably have done it in other areas of your life, only you will know. If you can come up with a new way of looking at things, so sometimes you have to look at things very closely when you haven't looked at them closely before. Sometimes you have to look at them from a great distance. Sometimes you have to look at them from somewhere in the future, or sometimes within a bigger context, bigger context, maybe of more time, maybe of more history, or maybe in a global context instead of personal. It can go either way, larger context, smaller context, but it's the same result because you will get to see things differently. Nobody discovered germs until they looked at water under a microscope, until they looked very, very closely. No one really understood how our planet works until they looked at it from outside of the planet, space. So we can do these same things within the issues that we're dealing with in our lives. This is how we come up with Satier's transforming idea and with the concept of the NLP reframe. And once you have reframed something, there's no looking back. As long as you implement it, of course, you have to actually make it work then. You know, reframes are great, then you have to make it work. If you have a good reframe, it's a lot easier to make it work than if you don't. Now, this is what most often happens, is when people go through this stage, this tends to happen. And that's why you don't see anybody up here in this particular diagram, because they resist, they hang on, they go through the chaos, and then they don't come across something new, they don't come across. And that's how you get people repeating the same relationships. That's how you get a global crash. Have you ever wondered why we have an economic crash every few years? We have people who have PhDs in economics. We have people who hold highly powered positions in universities and governments, and often both, and yet none of them can actually come up with a solution to this problem. And that's because this is what's happening, because they're not thinking of new ways of doing things, and they're not implementing new ways of doing things. As soon as people do, now if you look at medicine, for instance, at the moment, no one's implementing new ways of doing things, and so they're not getting new solutions. If you go back to the Victorian period, you go back to 100 years ago, most of the major illnesses that plagued humanity were fixed at that time. And since then, you know, it's been a long time since we've actually fixed a major illness. What we do nowadays is mostly we manage illness rather than actually curing it. It doesn't have to be that way. So let's go back to our original diagram, and this is how it can be. And in order for it to be this way, as we know, this has to happen. The key to the whole thing is the reframe, the transforming idea. And that key is something that we want to develop within ourselves, the ability to do that. Once you develop this ability, then you can apply it in many different situations. Everything you already know and understand and have learned and skills that you have will help you in doing that, in implementing it. It's not as if you have to then go out and learn a whole load of new things. Sometimes you might want to because it'll be even better, but all of us have a wealth of skill, knowledge and information that's just waiting to be applied in a new way. One of the jobs that we do at Transformations is looking for exactly those kind of situations and the kind of knowledge and skills that can empower people to do that. So what's the difference that makes the difference, as we like to say? What's the thing that enables people to become more empowered, to get the key, and to be able to become more effective in difficult situations, even if those situations involve money and economics, to become more abundant, to become more prosperous? Whenever there's an economic crash, there are always people who make money. There are people who go down, it's true. At the same time, there are people who come up. So ideally, we would like to be amongst those people. Now, there are many resourceful states. We're going to look at this one. All sorts of, you can be courageous, you can be inspired, you can be caring and compassionate. There are many, many resourceful states. A resourceful state is any state of mind, of emotion, of intellect, which is useful to you, in which you don't feel that there's something missing, in which you are able to come up with ways of coping with things and creating new things. Now we're going to look at happiness. And there's a reason we're going to look at happiness is because it's one of the easiest states to generate, even under the most difficult conditions. And we'll come back to that, even under the most difficult conditions, more difficult than we have now, people still generate happiness. And the good thing is there's specific techniques for doing that, which we can look at. And then the second thing we're going to talk about is having a clear vision of what you want to create. Again, we have so many studies on these things. It used to be that those of us working in this field, we had to rely on what we call empirical data. We had to rely on anecdotes and stories. We know these things are true because we've seen people do them over and over again. But we've been joined in the last decade and a half by the neuroscientists. And the neuroscientists are systematically proving everything that we've said is true. Places like Harvard and Yale and Stanford and Oxford and Cambridge are doing wonderful research showing that certain ways of using our brain, or mind if you like, certain ways of using the brain or the mind will make a positive difference. They will. It's absolutely guaranteed because it is just the way the brain works. It's the way we're set up. Now, your brain already knows how to do things that we're talking about. What we're going to encourage you to do is to free your mind from external circumstances and create an internal reality. We already do this automatically with our negative emotions. What this little graphic shows is how when, for instance, we get angry, we tend to make an image. We'll have an image of the past or of the person we don't like or of the thing that's annoying us. We will feed that image to our brain. Now, our brain will then respond by generating certain chemicals, what we call neurotransmitters. The neurotransmitters will go down into our body, and what they will cause to happen is they will cause certain chemicals to be secreted into our body. Now, we've chosen the adrenal glands on top of the kidneys because it's an easy, simple one, very popular and very common. These will cause us to feel fear, or they'll cause us to feel anger, or possibly both, alternately or at once. But all this happens automatically. Now, the reason that I'm saying your brain already knows how to do this is because this is what our brains do all of the time. Whenever you think of something, that image will be taken by your brain as being a real thing. Our brains, and again, the neuroscientists have helped us here, our brains or our minds don't know the difference between a real image and an imaginary image. That's why you can feel good when you think of, not be terrified if you think of a spider or a snake, because your brain doesn't know the difference. So it will make all the same emotions, the same physiological responses, and you'll go through all the same things. Our brains already know how to do this. Now, what we have to do is start to train our brains to do this in a good way, because it does all these things automatically, unconsciously, in what's more or less a negative way. And the reason it does that is for survival purposes. Now, we have to take control of that. We have to intervene. And the key to that is consciously intervening from the frontal lobes up here. This is where consciousness lives, right at the front. Back here, there's an interesting brain model nowadays going around called three-brain theory. Up here is the human part of the brain. This is where we have to think and act consciously and create and make decisions. This here is the mammalian brain. Mammalian brain's like a big puppy or a big dog. It will just go along with things. It will just feel good or it will feel bad, you know, depending on the tone of voice you use. You know, anybody with a dog, you'll know this. And back here we have the lizard brain, the simple brain that's been there from forever, the earliest evolutionary brain before the other ones developed. All this brain knows is kill or be killed, survive or be destroyed, eat or starve, good or bad, up or down, you're against me, you're for me. It just makes simple binary decisions, which is great for basic survival and is a disaster for other areas of our lives because it will make us feel that things are worse than they are. It will make us feel that something's happening, which is not really happening. Now, we always have a choice, and this is what Viktor Frankl said. Viktor Frankl wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And Viktor Frankl was a doctor who, at the outbreak of the Second World War, he was a Jewish doctor, at the outbreak of the Second World War, was rounded up by the Nazis and he was taken to Auschwitz. And Auschwitz, as you probably know, is probably about the worst possible conditions that you could live or die in. But Viktor Frankl discovered something very powerful, which is that there is a space. There is a space in our minds always. And if you look at Buddhist psychology or philosophy, and you look at, again, what the neuroscientists are saying, between every thought and the next thought, there is a space. Between every emotion ending and the next emotion beginning, there's a space. Now, that space can be tiny, but it's there. And in that space is our power to choose how to respond. And as he says, in that lies our growth and our freedom. We can choose to respond well or badly, a good strategy or a bad strategy. And we're going to call these two strategies survival mode and creation mode. And I'll tell you a bit more about those as we go along. Now here's survival mode. Left to itself, the brain will tend to focus on the negative, and that's your back brain. That's what we call the lizard brain talking, the simple brain. Now the simple brain is great because it enables us to survive, but it's still behaving as if it's millions of years ago and we're walking through the savannah and there's a saber-toothed tiger trying to kill us. And so we have to be afraid all the time, we have to pay attention all the time. Left to itself, it tends to focus on the negative because it has to protect us, defend us from the negative. Now, you may have noticed that the media more or less continually feeds us negative information. I don't know if you've ever noticed this. You can see it with the whole COVID thing at the moment. They're constantly telling you who's died and how many people have got sick. There are almost no stories about people recovering. I heard a story today of a 65-year-old guy in New York who's supposedly died from COVID. He was 65, now he lives with his father who's 96 and his father's fine. Why? How? These are the things we should be looking at. You know, during the Great Plague in the Middle Ages in Europe, 1/3 of the population died, but 2/3 didn't. 2/3 thrived. Let's look at them. And this is a fundamental principle under positive psychology. And positive psychology was developed in Harvard University and has been going for a few decades now. Has done an awful lot of research all over the planet and how these ideas actually work in practical terms. Positive psychology says, let's stop looking at the bad stuff. It's just there. We know it's there. We know we have to deal with it. Let's look at the good stuff and find out how we can get the good stuff to work for us. Now, when you're in survival mode, when you're just worried all the time and you're anxious all the time, this is not to say you don't have real problems or real issues. The question is, can worrying about them and being afraid of them help? And the answer is no, it can't possibly help. Because all these negative emotions disempower us. And they disempower us on a number of levels and in certain ways. And they disempower us physically as well as emotionally and psychologically. And one of the ways, or two of the ways that they disempower us physically is that when you are afraid, two of the major systems that keep you alive and healthy shut down. They shut down, and in extreme situations, they stop working. One is your digestive system, and the other is your immune system. Now, let's just stop and think about this. If your digestive system isn't working properly, then your nutrition is decreased. That makes you more prone to get illnesses if you don't have good nutrition. So you'll be eating all the right food, but if you're indulging in these negative emotions, you won't be getting the nutrition from it. The second thing is the immune system. The immune system shuts down because when you're being chased by a lion, it doesn't really matter if you catch a cold or not. So the immune system shuts down because it needs all the energy it can get. So now, if you're in these sort of states because you're worried about the economy and you're worried about where, how you're going to go forward and make money, can you get back the money you had before, or can you make more in future? If you've got all these things going on, these two systems will shut down. You become more likely to become physically ill, as well as depressed, as well as all the other things. So these are the characteristics of the survival mode. And it's fine for brief periods. It is what enables us to survive, no doubt about it. But it should never happen for more than a few seconds or minutes at the most. And if you go on YouTube, watch some wildlife videos of a deer being chased by a lion, and you'll see something interesting. When the lion doesn't catch the deer, as soon as the danger is over, the deer will just shake a little bit, and then it will just carry on as normal. And you've probably seen this again if you have pets or anything. In a natural state of mind, as an animal, for example, these negative emotions just disappear. Immediately the need for them is gone, so are the emotions. Unfortunately, as humans, we tend to keep running them. It's one of the problems with having a huge brain, is that huge brain needs things to do. It needs to be fed. And if you don't feed it, it will just run the old stuff. Now, this is a characteristic of the survival mode, is it makes reference to your fixed past. The past is fixed because it happened. The future is not fixed because it doesn't exist. It hasn't happened yet. So what we constantly do is we look at the past, we refer to the past, and then we visualize the future as being the same as the past. And if you're in the survival mode, you're going to be projecting negative imaginations into the future. Now, we know there's bad stuff going on, but we don't know what the future is going to be. Oh, by the way, regarding future and being in creation mode, generating positive emotions, Viktor Frankl decided during his 4 years in Auschwitz, where he was being tortured and starved, made to bury his friends and family who were being shot in front of his eyes, being given only pajamas to wear and no shoes in the middle of winter when there was knee-deep snow. Having all these terrible conditions, what he did is he constantly imagined himself, constantly focused on himself, creating a new kind of therapy and being able to teach that therapy. Now, he survived Auschwitz, and at the end of the Second World War, when all those people were liberated from those camps, Frankl emigrated to the USA, and he wrote a book called Logotherapy, and he set up an institution, and he taught his system of therapy, and many, many people benefited from it. So it's interesting to reflect that he's just one example, and you can find many, many, many examples. This can be a very, very practical approach. It's not just a theoretical idea or a feel-good idea. Now, the creation mode, we're going to put that as opposite the survival mode. This doesn't happen automatically for most people. You might meet the occasional one. If you find one, hang out with them. Don't let them go. Marry them. Do whatever you have to do. Stay with that person if this happens automatically. But for most of us, we have to create it. We have to create the creation mode in ourselves. We have to make a conscious and deliberate intervention. Now, once we have this mode going, it's characterized by positive emotions like happiness, inspiration, compassion, courage, care, friendliness, spontaneity, humor. Humor is really big. Humor is really important here, as is compassion. Humor can often give you compassion as well. All these things are important, and you can make your own list. However, how many other positive emotions can you think of? And the creation mode references the potential future. And I say the potential future because it hasn't happened. So its reference is what could be that is good. And it's you that's going to decide what could be that is good. Just like all the people who ever invented anything good, that's what they did. Whatever that kind of thing was, whether it was a new therapy or a new kind of vehicle or a new way of forming energy, they all did it the same way. And they did it the way that we're going to think about and look at next. Because there are always certain principles that are the same. Now, when you're in the creation mode, as the name suggests, be more creative. And I don't mean you're going to go and start painting pictures and writing novels. You might do, but that's not the only way you can be creative. Creative means to create. So you could create anything. You could create a new way of relating to your children, a new way to make money, a new way to generate energy, a new way to help people. It's down to you. Now, to be in a creation mode, we're going to say it's very useful to have two things happening. One is to have a resourceful state. We've talked about what a resourceful state is. Some consistently positive state of mind, frame of mind. When we say a state, we mean everything. The way you think, the way you feel, the way you behave, all of these things are your state. And then we also need a clear vision. Now, we're going to use something called the happiness advantage, again, developed in Harvard University over a couple of decades, I think now, and given a real surge recently. The happiness advantage is based on the fact that all the research that they've done They've done it in over 40 countries, and they've done it in economic slumps, they've done it in economic highs, they've done it with people who are rich and people who are poor, they've done it in all kinds of educational, medical, corporate situations, and it has always worked. So it's called the happiness advantage because it is an advantage when you're happy. It's that simple. When you're happy, it will generate a resourceful state. And the other thing we need is a clear vision. Now, to have a clear vision, there's a lot of people talking about visualization and everything nowadays, and that's great. We need really to have a clear vision, an effective way of practicing visualization. And again, this needs to tie in with this because, again, one of the things I've mentioned, Joe Dispenza, one of my favorite people, one of the things that he's pointed out, as well as people not being able to think outside of their emotions, is that because they can't think outside their emotions, you can visualize all you want, you can affirm all you like, but if over here, what you have is negativity and you have a low emotional state, a low energetic field, then all this stuff is not going to make that much difference necessarily. Not saying don't do it, won't necessarily make that much difference. Okay, so here's what Sean Acker of Harvard University has called the happiness advantage. This is based on, we have to run through this pretty quickly at the moment. You can do more research or you can cover the course that's going to follow up this introduction. There are specific ways of generating a state of happiness. Now, if you always focus on the negative, if you keep reading those lines every day about COVID and how many more people have got it and how terrible it is, you're likely to have the unhappiness advantage or even the depression disadvantage. Because you're likely to your brain will run the same circuits over and over again. Now, you may know that every thought that you have is literally a pathway, a neural pathway in your brain. And when you think something again and again, it starts off as just an electrical impulse, but after you've thought it a certain number of times, it gets hardwired and then it happens automatically. So what we need to do is rewire our brains, new hardwiring, so that we automatically do things that make us feel good. And here is what all that research for so long now has come up with, such simple techniques. We know these work. What you need to do, the things I'm going to show you, is to do them for 21 days in a row. If you do them every day for 21 days, you will have created new neural pathways. And that means that your positive thoughts, well, we don't mean positive thoughts in a kind of a wishy-washy, hopeful kind of a way. We mean literally that the neural pathways in your brain will be new ones that inevitably result in you feeling good. So it'll be just like when you flick a switch, the electricity can only go from the switch to the bulb. When you have a new thought and the neural pathway is there, it can only go down that neural pathway to a positive result. So just think of 3 new things. I would say new things, and do this every day. So every day, just 3 things, and just write them down. This doesn't have to take long. It can be something very simple, but keep doing that. Means your brain starts to filter for what's good instead of filtering for what's bad. It starts to focus on what's good instead of focusing on what's bad. When you focus on what's bad and what's negative, you get negative chemicals, as we showed you earlier, in your system. And then you have negative emotions, and then you have more negative thoughts, and then you have more negative chemicals, and it will just be a vicious circle. The reverse is also true. The more that you do these things, the more you'll generate those positive thoughts, which will generate those positive chemicals, give you positive emotions, and so on. You need 21 days in this. Write for 2 minutes about one positive experience. Anything. I mean, if you found your favorite pickle in the back of the cupboard and you thought you didn't have any, that's a positive experience. Relish that experience. If your child smiled at you in that way, that lets you know that it loves you and trusts you, then that's a positive experience. If you saw a good comedy program, these don't have to be big things. Start to filter for the good things, because everybody's life is full of good things. Even under the most awful conditions, everyone's life still has lots of good things, and we have to notice them and rewire our brains to notice them. Exercise, everybody knows this nowadays. Your exercise can be anything. When I'm working with people, I often get people who are going on about the gym, and of course all the gyms are closed and you can't go. It really doesn't matter. You can do tons of exercise on the spot. May not be as sociable or as interesting or whatever, but it's exercise and it has the same physiological effect. So you need to exercise. You need to do it 20 minutes a day of something, anything, whatever it is you enjoy. If you really like keeping fit, I'd recommend you get a copy of the Canadian Air Force exercise book. because they perfected a way, back in the Second World War, perfected a way that people could get completely fit in only 20 minutes wherever they were. It was wartime and they had to be very, very practical. So but there's a million other things, and we all have the internet. Meditate. Now, I think everybody, let's just go back. I think everybody knows about meditation now. What is it? Well, just about anything can be meditation as long as you're focusing on something other than the nonsense that usually automatically goes through your mind. As long as you don't have the trivia and you don't have the negativity, then you're in meditation. Now, having said that, there's also very specific things you can do. My understanding of meditation in a really fundamental way is that between every thought ending and the new one beginning, there is a space. And if you focus on that space, then you're at peace. So just notice the space in between. But then again, you can go online and you can get all kinds of instructions. Anything that makes you feel good, that makes you feel calm, is a good thing. If you have a piece of music that opens your heart up, just listen to that piece of music every day for 10 minutes or whatever. Find your own ways. But meditation is where you take your mind away from everything else and you focus on one thing that is good. And some people do this. They just have like a spiritual figure or something that they focus on, and that's all they need to do. I could talk a lot about this and give you so many references from so much different research and different ways of doing this. Like I say, we have limited time on the introductory, and these are, it's just to give an idea. Random acts of kindness. Now, what would that be? We were working with a group one time some years ago, and the Bahraini government had sent them to be programmed by us. And we said this before random acts of kindness. We said to them, okay, can somebody think of a random act of kindness? What would that be? And somebody was very quiet for a while. And then somebody said, take out a subscription to a charity. That doesn't qualify. That's not random. That's something that you can do and then forget about, and you can just sort of reassure yourself that you're being a good person because you've got that subscription. This has to be live, because we're talking about reprogramming your emotions and your mind in the moment, day by day, moment by moment. Look around you. Even if you are stuck in your apartment or your home with a limited group of people, or even if you're in your apartment by yourself, there are always ways you can do something kind. If you're by yourself, you can just do an email or a WhatsApp to somebody and you can thank them for something. Or you can tell them something good that you think about them. I know some of the stuff sounds cheesy, but it does work. And if you're with people, look for those opportunities. Just look for them. They're always there. If you're out and you're driving, you will have plenty. Although less than you used to, because there's not so much on the road at the moment. Okay, so that's Harvard University. That is the happiness advantage, and that is a proven system. Again, we go into this more in the course, so probably worth you having a look at that. And we go into how you actually do it, and getting feedback on it and developing it, because you know what these things are like. The seeds are there. We all know so many things, but we don't all implement so many things. That's what we need to do. That's why we have courses, and that's why we have people to lead us through these things. Now, here's the other element. So we've got generating a resourceful state. Now, you could generate some other resourceful state, but happiness is fundamental and easy once you have a technique for it. The other thing is have a clear vision of what you choose to create. Now, when I was putting this PowerPoint together, I was looking desperately for a long time for all sorts of images of nice houses and things. Because, I was thinking, what does everybody want? Everybody wants a nice house. So I didn't want to put something there for a vision that maybe you wouldn't want. And I couldn't find anything that, really fit the bill. So I've ended up showing you a picture of my house. This is my house in Morocco. And it's on the Atlantic coast, and it looks straight out across the Atlantic Ocean. And it's surrounded by forest. If you look out to the east and to the south, you can't see the end of the forest. It just goes on and on. If you look out to the west, you just see the ocean. And there's some fields. And the now, the reason I've chosen this is because we created this from scratch with my wife. We bought the land, we designed it, we created it, and so we know what it's like in a practical way, not just in a kind of a, like I was saying earlier on, a wishy-washy way. We know what it's like to create something from nothing, and we practice these techniques in order to do that. And having a clear vision was a part of it. Now, one thing is to have a clear vision. So that means, I know lots of people talk about these things nowadays. how to do it, always the key. You know, get your pen and paper out, get your photographs out, go Google, but whatever it is that you want, make it as absolutely rock solid as you can if it doesn't exist now. And if it's a development of something that does exist now, but you want it to be so much better, then do the same thing. But get it to be as real as it can be. Because if you think back to that diagram of the image that enables you to have physiological responses, that enables you to have chemical responses in your body that can actually raise your immune system or depress your immune system. That's what we're talking about here. Talking about real chemical, biological processes in your body caused by an image in your brain. Then the more the more real you can make that image, then the more it's going to affect you as if it's real. So this is the other element you need. So beyond, if you want to be prosperous, if you want to be abundant, if you want to get beyond the current economic challenges, there are ways to do it. And the ways that you do it may be something new that no one's ever thought about before. I've been creating new ways myself. Layla's been doing the same thing, new ways of working, new ways of doing things just in this last sort of month or so, where we've had to deal. I mean, this is where I live, this is my home. And this is where we're normally working from, except when we come to the Middle East to do, to do our workshops and our trainings and so on. So I can't even go home at the moment. You know, I really would rather be locked down there than in this apartment in Dubai. But I know what it's like. I know the reality of it. So I can't even do that. So what I have to do is I have to create new things, new ways of working here and now. So create your vision, and with your vision, we also have something else, which we like to call current reality. Now, again, I've searched through so many photographs in the last few days. I was searching for an image of the land when we first bought it. There was nothing there, you know. There was a few goats. There wasn't, apart from that, nothing, but I just couldn't find those. We got thousands of photographs, and I just couldn't find it. But just to give an idea, and this current reality aspect will change. Your current reality is what you actually have now. Now, often when people are visualizing what they want for the future, they pretend, and people do this with affirmations as well, they pretend that current reality isn't the way it is. Well, it is. And if your subconscious mind is going to get behind your conscious mind and enable you to become more empowered and more creative, okay, we can free it up by having a positive state of mind. Good, that was the first part. We can free it up. Now, though, in order for it to create something new, it has to know what we already have. So pretending that everything's just fine when it isn't is not as effective as allowing it to be there. Allow it to be there. It is there. If you're in a bad relationship, the bad relationship is there. Pretending it's good won't necessarily make it better. However, if you have a very, very clear idea of what it is that you want and how to create it, you know, the how, this space between the two, the how will be filled in largely by your unconscious mind. Your conscious mind will come up with things to do and ways of doing it. Your unconscious mind, which as you probably know is so much more powerful, will present your conscious mind with hunches, with intuition, with ideas. It may even arrange coincidences for you so that new things can happen. So this is, again, we go into this in more detail in the course, but these are important and practical elements. We first started working with this kind of visualization way back in the 80s in a system called dimensional macrostructural alignment, which you don't see much of nowadays. So that's the thing to do. So keep focusing on that vision. So, oops, that was a big mistake. Bear with me. Too much enthusiasm there on the mouse. So you're going to make your vision. Now, okay, you want to be prosperous. You want to make more money. You want to compensate for what's happened during this economic breakdown, perhaps. I'm assuming that will be one of the things you want. If you don't, that's fine. There's plenty of other things you can want to. The principles that create your prosperity are the same principles that will create good relationships and good health and just about everything else. So here you have your vision and you have your current reality. Now, by continually focusing back on the vision and allowing yourself to notice the current reality, we don't want to focus on it. Don't focus on it. Stay away from the focus. This is what we focus on over here, the vision. However, current reality is there. Just let it be there, and then your unconscious can do all the wonderful things that your unconscious is capable of doing for you. And then what will happen over time is this. There will be a process. Sometimes this process is fast. Sometimes this process is slow. Depends on what we're working with and how well we're working with it. Who else is involved? There are a number of factors. But but we know it happens. We know from experience, many, many years of training, coaching, teaching, making it work in our own lives. So that's really what I wanted to say today. To get this idea across. Now, I know some of these ideas, you may have heard them before, you may have heard variations on them. We can always focus and we can always make things better. You may have a great knife in the kitchen that you like to use, but that knife can always be sharpened and then it will be more effective. You may have a great car, the car can have its engine tuned and then it will go faster. You know, whatever your metaphor is. So here's the time. Now, you can all, thank you for your attention. And I hope you found it useful and we'll continue to find it useful. If you have any questions now, this is the time to ask them. So you can just unmute your microphone and just. Okay, seems like either people don't have questions or maybe they're a bit shy, or I suppose another explanation would be that maybe they don't know how to unmute their microphone. I hope that's not true for people. I'll give you a few minutes to come up with things. Microphones on my side here, but you know, if yours is muted, then it seems like I can't actually change that from this.
Well, thank you very much for today's session. It was extremely informative and practical. So thank you for that.
Good. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it, and you must be the same person who who said that the screen was working okay. Are you the same person?
Today.
There's always one. It's always like that when you're with a class. You know, there's always one person that you can rely on. You know, to give you feedback. So thank you very much, whoever you are. Thank you very much. Here's the details of the course that's coming up in the near future. So, as I say, we're working with Illuminations. We're working under their banner. And just go along and register with them if you would like to join us on this course. It will be an online course. A bunch of things that we're doing in this time, as many people now are, because we still need to keep the work going. We need things to, you know, to continue to improve people. We've had a whole load of our own courses that were already in process. We were partway through, but then when they were stopped, and we've had to move those across. We've just been teaching a cognitive behavioral therapy course online. Because it's not quite so good online, but it's a lot better than it not happening at all. We had to get those ones through because, you know, people get diplomas at the end and so on, which are serious qualifications. Here's the details for you. I'm going to hang around, and then after that, that will be the conclusion of the webinar.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Well, the last one was interesting. So, one person was communicating with maybe the questions after. No, the last one was yeah. That's sort of interesting because that went out to everybody. Most of the